Thank you, Satyam. And it's always wonderful to be here and talk to all the members of the Action Coach, and particularly for the third edition of the Business Redefined Summit. I'm looking forward to this wonderful chat with Mr. Shiva Kumar. I think if anybody has been in the consumer business industry, somebody to look up to and to learn from, it's truly Mr. Shiva Kumar, who's done some wonderful work in his career, and he continues to do it as the executive vice president of Aditya Birla Group. But I think I would really credit him for making Nokia a household name here in India, and of course, then he's also been the chairman and CEO of Pepsi. And being an alumnus of IIT Madras and IIM Calcutta, he's always gone back to educational institutions. And today he's also on the board of XLRI and IIM Udaipur. And of course, he is the chairman of the Mobile Marketing Association and the chairman of Advertising Standards Councils of India. Wonderful to have you here today, sir, Mr.
Ritu, my
Shiva Kumar.
pleasure. Always. Thank you.
And
Thank you for inviting me.
no, it's a pleasure, sir. In fact, it's always a great learning experience for everybody. And I mean, I have seen your illustrious career, in fact, written about it many times in my career as a journalist. And it's always good to know how you planned and helped the growth of consumer products in India. Now, today we are, sitting in a world which is changing. I mean, I remember when we started writing for Retailer magazine back in 2005, it was all about modernizing retail and thinking that, we organized retail was the thing to talk about. But today, everything we're talking about is in terms of digital. So, let me start by asking you this, that today, what should be the mindset for anybody who is starting up as a CEO in an organization which is very growth oriented, which needs to scale up fast. They want to set up goals which are meant to be achieved in like 3 to 4 years, which were earlier achieved in 10 years or 12 years. So what would be your advice to CEOs, being a CEO yourself of very, very large multinational organizations, to be able to find their mojo out there and to be able to achieve their goals?
Yeah. So thank you, Ritu, for that. So the thing about a CEO job is it doesn't show who you are. It reveals a lot more about you and as a person. So, a lot of CEOs think that they'll just land up and they'll just turn up there and then things will work out. It's not true at all. A CEO job is possibly one of the most difficult jobs in the world. At a first level, you need to think whether a small company, large company, whatever size of company, how are you going to integrate people around a common goal? And that's the real challenge. Every team, if you define the team as the full company or your own management team or a structural team, a finance team, a marketing team, a supply chain team, etc., the ability for a CEO to define a common goal, irrespective of the skills and capabilities in the team, irrespective whether they're co-located or dispersed, okay, irrespective of the organization structure. I think that is the big challenge for a CEO, the ability to rally people around a common purpose and a goal. After that, you have to be absolutely clear in every job right now. You have to have an ambition which is higher than the resources that you have. If you have 100 rupees and you deliver 100 rupee results, that is not sensible. You have 100 rupees, you deliver 200 rupees results, that's a multiplier. So most companies and most industries are actually tracking that multiplier right now. Okay. The other thing I think about a CEO is you need to really manage your stakeholders. It can be the board, it can be your investors, it can be your ecosystem. You can have partnerships, whatever it is. When you take over as a CEO of a large entity, then that large entity has a certain momentum. Whether that momentum is in the right direction or wrong direction is something that you need to judge. If you join a small company or a startup company, it's far easier. You can afford to change the strategy of a startup company every 7 days, but you can't do the same with a large organization. So you have to judge at what speed you're able to take the organization forward without people saying, hey, you know what, I'm insecure now. Too many things have changed. I don't know what is going to happen in this company.
Sure, sir. And so today when you said when in a large organization, it's difficult to sort of move the elephant, but in a smaller organization, it's much easier to do it. But today, the expectations from a CEO are so massive. I mean, particularly for a small organization looking to grow very big, in a very small state of time. And then, of course, even startups don't have unlimited resources. They also have limited resources, even with the funding that they have. So what would you advise them to sort of focus on first, and therefore be able to achieve the goals that have been put forward by investors, by the startup founder himself, and so on?
I think the thing in any job you do, especially at a CEO level, large or small, the first thing you need to question is your strategy in place? Is your strategy the correct strategy that you're adopting? Second, is the execution of that strategy in the right place or it needs improvement? If your strategy is the right one, then you fire up the execution. If your strategy is the wrong one, then you have to pivot from that strategy to a new strategy which makes sense for all of you. But that requires buy-in, that requires communication, that requires resetting the business and its approach to this. So you have strategy, you have execution. The link between the two is people. Do you have the right capable people who understand your strategy and who are executing it? Because strategy is a 50,000 feet concept, execution is a 5 feet concept. And you need that very strong middle management to do it. So there are lots of companies with lots of strategies which don't see the light of the day. So the key thing is strategy, people, execution. Constantly think along those terms. The next is you should not be burning too much cash. Large company or small company, everybody wants a profit. Everybody wants positive cash flow. Everybody wants you to have good return on capital employed. So the financial measures must be in the right place or must be trending in the right place. One thing I would advise, large or small company in these times, Ritu, don't add costs. The moment you add cost, your break-even point goes higher, you'll end up doing the wrong things. Cost is a killer in today's world.
Sir, absolutely. That is very well said, and I think that is your advice worth weight in gold, I would say. So, sir, given the fact that times have changed, and I mean, particularly while, of course, I think overall the business scenario was changing very fast from, let's say, about 2000, year 2002, and come down to year 2020. Things have moved so rapidly and so different in terms of building businesses and growing businesses. So, how would you tell people who are in their 40s or 50s, they've already done about 20 years of their role in an organization, and today with everything being digital and talking about digital transformation. So how do you unlearn and relearn, if you are a middle career sort of professional today? What would your advice be to him or her?
Yeah, so fair. That's a fair question. So this is a question. The biggest challenge for every leader is to stay relevant because the world is going past you so quickly. If you look at the history of management concepts, I think in the last 100 years or the last 50 years, we've had something like 40 concepts or so. So which means you have a new concept almost every 14 to 16 months. So if you don't learn for 1 year, you're going to fall back. If you don't learn for 2 years, you're going to fall back by 2-3 concepts. And I think that's dangerous for you. So the first thing is for a leader to stay relevant. So how do you stay relevant? In today's world, you can stay relevant by reading. You can stay relevant by watching television. You can stay relevant by going to YouTube and following leaders and seeing what they're doing. But more important, I think, even in your own industry, one of the things you should do is talk to two people outside of your industry every month. If there is something good which is happening in that industry, you can almost be sure that it will land up in your industry also. So have a conversation with people outside your industry and ask them, hey, how do you do this? Okay, what is the methodology? What are the positives of this? What are the negatives of this? And sure enough, as long as you keep learning, you're able to bring that knowledge to your team and to your company. And that's the only way I would do. And I would encourage all the leaders to experiment as much as possible. Take small pockets and keep experimenting. And that's the only way you can learn.
Sure. And I mean, what are your thoughts on upskilling yourself? I mean, in what direction, if I were to think, as a professional, if I were to sort of enhance my skills, what should be a good starting point?
I would say number one, I think the whole of the world requires digital skills today. I think there's absolutely no doubt about that. So you need to be very good at managing, digitization. Digitization as an end-to-end process, not as a process which is run by finance or run by IT. So, for example, in PepsiCo as well as Nokia, the sales and operations plan would determine right up to the last as to what procurement we had of either sugar or bottles or whatever it was. So you need an end-to-end plan. And I think that's very important. And only digital can give you that. Second thing I'd seriously ask you to think about and learn is business models. Because current physical business models are getting disrupted by new digital models. So I think you need to learn a lot more about digital models. The third thing I would urge you as a CEO is to really up the game on collaboration and empathy. I think you need to really talk to people, work with people, etc. So if I were to say, how can you be a more effective team leader in today's terms? I think I would say A is for authenticity. B, get your baseline right, what you stand for. C, you need a lot of courage to face the world today. D, there is no substitute for discipline, rock solid discipline. Then you need energy because people get inspired by your energy. And F, in all the things around you, you need to focus. So I would say authentic, base, courage, discipline, energy, and focus. I think that some of them are time immemorial, like discipline is time immemorial, focus is time immemorial. Okay, your base is time immemorial. The ability to have courage in a very uncertain time is something very new. You cannot have a deliberate strategy. Okay, you cannot have a deliberate strategy, as you said, which plays out for 10 years or 5 years. You need to think about operating your strategy in the gray zone. And I think that's critical.
Sure. So, sir, today with a very hybrid sort of a work culture that has come to happen amongst us today, it's the new normal, work from home, some people working from office, and then of course every organization has a mobile workforce. So as a business leader, as a CEO, what are your sort of thoughts on how do you manage and be with your people as one, despite the fact that people are working remotely, some people in the office, some people are traveling for work? How do you bring them all together and they are all sort of moving towards the same targets and same goals?
So let's step back and see. One of the things this pandemic has taught us is that we can work from home. We can learn from home. We can teach from home. We can do almost everything from home. I think that's something which it has taught us. The other thing it has taught us as a byproduct of that is that we've been operating with a high cost structure. We've been operating with assumptions which we've never challenged. And now we are seriously challenging those assumptions. So one of the big assumptions for all CEOs and companies is the number of people or the number of resources needed to do a job. Today, I think most people have recognized that you don't need so many people. I think most companies are saying that we have too many people. The next thing we've recognized thanks to the pandemic is that the digital model is here to stay. Consumers have gone digital far faster than companies or CEOs. Okay, so if you take, for example, the Indian FMCG market, today, 8% of sales in metros of FMCG is e-commerce. To give you a sense, the physical, modern trade format took 30 years to get to that 8% level in large cities. It's happened in a matter of months. Over 10 years, America, e-commerce as a percentage of total retail sales, over 10 years, it had come to 16%. In the last 6 months, it's gone from 16 to 32%. So what happened in 10 years has happened in 6 months' time. Okay, so the digital model is here to stay. The way I would look at it is ask yourself, what is the core of your company? What is that you definitely need to do? And what can you outsource? Whatever you can outsource, you outsource it. Next, if you look at the core of your company, split it by functions and say, how many functions are truly needed in office? And how many don't need to come to office? For example, if you look at any technology company or durable company, you don't need service people to come to an office. You can have a service center which has, the spare parts, etc. But their job is to visit homes, and their job is to visit, consumers in their homes and repair their products or whatever it is. So, for example, Cabin Care has closed its head office, has closed its sales office. If you look at RPG Group, all of sales they've said is now work from home. Sales, you don't need an office. If you want to meet the salespeople at the end of the month, you can all meet in a coffee shop, or you can go to a meeting room and meet. So I would seriously ask you to think about which functions are needed in an office. And even within those functions which are needed in an office, who can come and work from office, who is needed and who can work from home. This ensures, or this will ensure, you have to think about it clearly as to what new policies will you bring in. If you're asking consumers to work from home, then you have to take care of their Wi-Fi bill. You are actually renting a small place in their home for your work. It's no longer home. It is a cubicle in home. You're renting that stuff. It's like a shop and shop in your format. In retail, you talk of shop and shop. This is office and home. Okay, so that's what you need to think about. Then what kind of policies are needed? How many people will come to office? Will they come every day? Will they come alternate day? How many people will work from home? How will you compensate them, etc.? So I think we'll have a bunch of new policies which will come through. But clearly, we have recognized that we are bloated. We have a higher cost structure, and we can definitely do more in the digital world. I think these lessons are there for every company.
So it's a very well said. I think, sometimes we say things and then they become the new normal as it is. So, the cubicle and the shop and shop structure that you've just mentioned it might just become the new normal in maybe in years or two's time, wherein we're actually looking for a room within the house. So, sir, you've given us some great numbers about the FMCG industry, and I can tell that data is the new oil. How you're quantifying your things and how you're quantifying everything around you is very important. So, I mean, just taking this quantitative analysis further, how do you sort of measure people's productivity when they are working from home or when they are working in a mobile environment? So what should be the quantitative factors of their work, and what should be the subjective factors one should look for in this environment that we are getting into?
So wherever they're working from, one of the things I would definitely not do is to have spy cameras on them. I see some stupid companies saying, please put your Teams or Zoom right through the day and we'll monitor whether you're on it or not. I think, that's like treating your employees like second standard children, which is just completely off the charts, which is completely wrong. I think the more people are not in office, the more you'll have to trust them to do the right thing, which I don't think leaders and companies have got a grip of. When people are under your nose in office, you see them every day, you walk around every day. Now that they're not going to be in office, you just need to trust that they will do the right thing. Okay. That's number one. Second is, follow-up will be a very different game in this new mode of work. In our normal day-to-day, if somebody had not done something, you would walk up to his table and say, hey, I haven't got this from you. Today, you have to send him an SMS or a WhatsApp or a phone call or an email to remind him. Okay. Now he has his own constraints, etc. So one, you have to trust. You have to build a new model of collaboration, which is not based on face-to-face, interaction at all. I think that's something which you need to think about. Next is, all work happens in a context. What's the context? And have you provided the resources based on that context? Okay. I think effort, by and large, I think most people come to work to say, I want to succeed. Okay. And I think by and large, I would assume that effort and commitment is in the right direction. So you really have to go back to look at productivity to say, what is the context and have I made the resources available to him? As long as you've done that, then I think you should trust your people to do the right thing. I think one of the fads which is happening right now, which is very sad, and I see this in many companies, people are on webinars from morning 10 o'clock to evening 10 o'clock. It's draining the mental health of people. Yeah. It's draining the energy of families. Now, some stupid CEOs have put 10 formats, 20 formats, 30 formats, fill this out, send it to me, etc. Even worse things to do. I think if anything, COVID should have taught us is to simplify. COVID is a complex situation. In order to deal with a complex situation, you need to throw simplicity at it. The more complexity you throw at it, the less productivity you will get. So to your question of how do you measure productivity, keep it as simple as possible. Trust your people to do the right thing. And as long as the output is in the right direction, you should be fine.
So that's an extremely important point, I think, how we sort of simplify productivity instead of complicating it. And I think a lot of study is now going to happen in this direction.
I'll give you a simple example on that, Ritu. In 1955, a company would report a maximum of 4 numbers to the stock market or to the analysts or to their own people. It would typically be revenue, market share, profit, something like that. Today, a company reports anything between 55 to 75 numbers. Okay, we have made life complex. Every man with a suitcase is driving a cause. So somebody will ask you how many women you have in your organization. Somebody will ask you how many LGBT people do you have in your organization. Somebody will ask you how many, physically challenged people do you have in your organization. Every single thing has become a measure. So large corporations have actually become bureaucracies right now. And especially large multinational organizations have become bureaucracy. Now look at the ambition of a multinational organization, 3% growth. The world is growing at 3%. A multinational organization which is $20 billion to $70 billion has the same ambition as the world, which is $90 trillion. There's something seriously wrong. And I believe bureaucracy has overtaken mentality in many a case in large corporations.
Sure, and that's probably also one of the reasons why we are seeing smaller and agile firms have become our startups, because they have less of the paperwork.
You're absolutely
or
right,
the red tape.
Ritu. If you look at the last 20 years, no big company has beaten a small company. A big company has bought a small company. It has not beaten it. But every fast company has beaten a slow company. So for every manager, every CEO, productivity should be about speed. Are you the best in terms of speed in your industry?
That's extremely well said, sir. So I'd also like to talk about another dimension today, which I'm noticing, which is transforming from a professional life to a consulting career. So I have also seen that people, particularly who were in their 50s and beyond, 20, 25 years of work life behind them, they are now sort of looking at, instead of going back, particularly after the pandemic, into full-time professional career, they want to become, or think that they should start a consulting and in one way their own sort of small business. Now, what would you sort of suggest to people who are getting into these roles? How do you succeed in a role such as this? And I mean, becoming a mentor, becoming a consultant, what does it really entail? And what would be a fair assessment? And you don't want to step on the founder's toes either as a consultant, but yet you want to do meaningful something for the organization. So what would be your suggestion to them?
First of all, I would say it's not easy. It sounds very easy from the outside. It is just not easy. And you must think about that. Second is, I would say, all the people you think will give you business will not give you business. In fact, the strangest people you have absolutely no correlation to, are the people who will actually give you some business. So you should never assume that, just because you have, a bunch of friends, they will all trip over each other in order to give you business. That I have rarely seen happen. Next is, I think you need to be extremely clear about, what you can contribute to yourself. Okay. Do you have something which is a unique skill or a unique capability which people want from you? Okay. That might not be there all the time. Okay. So, it might not be that obvious. Okay. So next thing is, I think when you start on your own, you could end up overplaying your strength. You could end up spending too much or spending too little. That's one of the mistakes entrepreneurs make. If I look at the Indian entrepreneurial scene today, people are ending up spending too much money on branding, hoping that somebody will buy them. Okay, ending up too much money on trying to acquire consumers because that consumer base will be valuable, whether X millions or Y millions. I think that's also a mistake. So you need to be very clear about that. Okay. Next is, I think you need to get your timing right. There's always the right timing when you start off on your own. And you have to be absolutely clear that your household, your family, your children's education, your parents' medical bills, your own medical bills, etc. You must draw up a list to say you are definitely able to take care of all of that for at least about 5 years. Because there is no overnight success. It will take you 5 years to even cross, the cost benefit line. So have you provided for that? And being on your own means that there is a very different lifestyle. When you work for a company, the travel department books your ticket, you land up in a city, a car comes to pick you up, you go to a hotel which the company has paid for. Now you have to do all of that yourself. And that's not easy at all. And many people just sheer underestimate the effort required to be an entrepreneur. They just don't get it right. That's what I would say.
Sure, sir. So we've also got some questions coming from our audience. So
Sure.
Ratish Pandey is asking that given that work from home is here to stay, what skills are there that employers and companies will look for in its future employees?
Depends on the function. I can't say a blanket thing. Depends on what you're recruiting for. So suppose it's a finance function, then you just want the guy to finish everything properly and get it done right. On the other hand, if it is a customer facing function, then you want him to be extremely good on screen. You want him to be extremely articulate. You want him to come across as pleasant. You want him to be a great listener. Okay, you don't want him to interrupt customers when they are talking. Okay, if he's a senior leader that you're recruiting, then he should have the ability to listen to people and get people's opinion and then reshape it in quick time and then feed it back to them. So that's what I would say, you really need to think about. I've just given you three. I don't think
Yes.
there's a stereotypical thing to say, hey, if you find 1, 2, 3, then you can get somebody. I would not say that.
Sure. We'll take a couple of more questions, sir, if you're not overstepping on your time. So there is Subbu from Parag who's joined, and he's saying that what team leadership skills would be more important in the new normal and virtual world? Though I think you've given a lot of them, but maybe if you want to sort of enumerate them.
So the topic of leadership will always, be top of mind for everybody because you just have so many companies or whatever it is. Okay, I think there's absolutely no doubt about that. I've been saying repeatedly that as a leader, you must have your own North Star or compass. You must know who you are. You must be comfortable in your skin. You cannot lead other people if you cannot lead yourself. So at a starting point, leaders have to be very comfortable in your skin, leading yourself. And the first thing, and I think the pandemic and new ways of working have actually accentuated it. 50% of the impression you make, whether you are a follower or a leader, is based on how you manage your time. And even more true in a work from home world. I know CEOs who say 4 o'clock review call, 6 o'clock review call, they come 1 hour late, 45 minutes late. And there are 40 people waiting on the call just for them drinking tea and gossiping. Absolute waste of time. So 1, know yourself. Number 2, be very, very good at managing time. 3rd, be very good at summarizing and précis of what you hear. Because leadership on a web, like I'm doing with you right now, you have to be telegraphic in nature. I cannot give you 4 pages of something. I have to be able to give you headlines. Okay, and if you ask for an explanation, I should delve deeper into it. If I start with the pros and forget the headline, you will lose me. Okay, so be yourself, be comfortable in your skin, manage your time very, very well, be very succinct, precise. Brevity is the name of the game. That's what I would say leaders will need when you do this right.
Sure. So some tips, Mr. JP is asking if you can share on managing time.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Again, a lot of people ask me that. The thing is, if you look at time, there are a number of components of time. If you take, 24 hours, assume you sleep 6 hours. Okay, you can't do much there except dream, right? That's the only thing you're allowed if you're fast asleep. The other 18 hours, I think you must definitely do the following if you want good integration in your life. I'll not say balance. Number 1, you need to exercise well. Whatever your definition of exercise. You must walk, you must run, whatever it is. Because if you're not physically fit, you will never bring that E to the table, which is energy. You will never bring that F to the table, which is focus. So I think it's extremely important to dedicate some time to some absolutely physical activity which keeps you in good shape. And that. Next, if you break your time will be a combination of live time and dead time. Live time is you're sitting, working. Sometimes you're sitting working alone, sometimes you're sitting working with other people. And then there's dead time. Let's take what's dead time. You're flying from point A to point B. A 2-hour flight is a dead time. Because you're confined, you can't do anything there. Your colleagues are not around. So what do you do typically? You either read a book, or you watch a movie, or you listen to music, etc. I use all my dead time to clear all my work. So if in PepsiCo or even in Nokia, when I took a flight, I would typically fly Emirates because it has Wi-Fi right through. So when I landed after a 14-hour flight, I was actually peaceful because I've completed all my email. So how you use your dead time is just as important as how you use your lifetime. And in your lifetime, you must stay focused. And that is what we call presence. You must honor the room. If you're in a meeting and you're doing WhatsApp, you're sleeping, you're passing comments, whatever, it doesn't help. If you are there, you must be the best prepared person in that room. You must contribute to it. So that's the way you get the best of yourself. And when you do that, time management becomes a repeatable habit. It is not a one-day fad. People who are really good at managing time make it a habit. Day in and day out, they turn up with the same habit. Because all of us have the same 24 hours. And the guys who are able to manage more invariably are the guys who have more of a fulfilling career, and they fulfill their own promise also much better.
So there is Dr. Hamid who's asking that if most of your team, or I think he said followers, are resisting everything to avoid work, how will you handle them?
That's another good question again. So, the first thing I'd say is go back and ask yourself, why do people come to work in your company? Okay. And if you take a general stab at it, here's what you'll find. The number one reason people come to work is they like the direction and the purpose of the company, whatever the company is doing. When all of us came to work for Nokia, we came to work for Nokia because we said it has a vision of connecting people. We are encouraged by that. We want more of that. That's why we came to work. Okay. So number one. Number two reason people come to work is colleagues, good colleagues. Nobody comes to work with cynical people. Nobody comes to work to say, you know what, Ritu is a horrible person. I enjoy sitting next to her. Nobody says that. On the other hand, people will say, Ritu is a wonderful colleague. See, she's so joyous. She's so wonderful. I love spending time with her. That's why they come to work. And the third reason they come to work is they believe they're progressing. What do you mean by progress? They submit a proposal or a plan in the morning, and their leadership team, okay, approves it or sends it back with comments or sends it back with clarifications by the evening. These are the three reasons people come to work. So if people have checked out of your organization, then it's quite likely that one of the three is at play, or all the three are at play. So instead of blaming the person, ask yourself, are you setting the right culture on these three dimensions? Okay. If you are, then I think you'll get more and more people. The other thing which people come to work, I think people want to be challenged, but people also want fairness in the way you treat them. Okay. So you challenge people to do better, but you recognize and reward people who do good job. The worst thing in an organization is when you spread the reward so thin, like butter on a slice of bread, that the best person is not rewarded and the guy who's doing nothing also gets rewarded. Those are the kind of things which actually tell people, you know what am I doing here? Why do I come to work here? It doesn't matter. There's no point in having stretch in this organization because leadership does not recognize it.
Sure, sir. That's a fair point. There's one more, Mr. Ismail, who's asking, how do you think the impact of automation is likely to be?
Huge.
Particularly what kind
Huge.
of
Absolutely
cloud
huge.
processes?
So if you look at manufacturing will undergo dramatic change. It's already undergone dramatic change in the consumer durable industry. I think all of car manufacturing will undergo change. All of process run companies, chemical companies, cement companies, all of that will be completely automated. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Okay. I think the robo market, I think, is essentially focused on Korea, Japan, and America, and Germany. These are the four big markets. Today, I think you can bring robots into every manufacturing line in India. Today, a robo costs you less than hiring a person. So now, as you get in more robots, people have to move up the value chain and do more value-added work, which is much more insightful work. Okay, they just cannot take data. They have to get insights from the data. They just cannot say this is the customer. They need to know the customer. Okay, so a very good example is if you take Dubai, they already have RoboCops, and they believe that in the next 2-3 years, 25% of their workforce will be RoboCops. Now, what does a RoboCop do? He does not differentiate whether you're a Pakistani, Indian, or an Emirati. He will apply the rules exactly as is. Okay, so you'll get far better standards of application of rules and procedures when you automate more. So I think you'll get into giant automation in almost every single industry.
So finally, I'll ask you this question. I mean, at Nokia and at FMCG organization, you've seen how channels were developed. There were like these layers of distributors, franchisees, and, exclusive store owners and so on. How do you think the channel is going to look much different, particularly from an FMCG or a retail perspective in the post-pandemic times?
I said this, Ritu. I said every business will have a digital business model. Okay, every business will have a digital business model, and so every business will have that. So every business has to develop a digital business model, which will be the core engine of working. A digital business model works on two things: the least friction. Discovering your brand and your company must have the least friction. Navigating your website must have the least friction. Okay, the number of drops to get to a price or delivery has to have the least friction. Okay, so that's absolutely critical. And then digital becomes the shortest distance between the consumer and the brand. So can you use your physical distribution infrastructure? Suppose you're staying in house cars. Can you use the physical infrastructure of your outlet to serve the consumer? Or can you ask the consumer to come there? I don't know. But I think it has to be the least distance. It has to have the least friction. Those are the two elements I would say on which everybody must develop their digital business model.
Sure. Thank you very much, sir. I think in the given time that we had, you've shared so much wealth of knowledge over here. And I think somebody still has one more question, is that, SMEs are suffering big time. And how do they need to be prepared for the future? If we can probably take that as the last.
A very good question. I think it goes back to the philosophy of SMEs, etc. Let me give you Germany as an example. Germany is an outstanding example of SMEs. Why? Because SMEs work hand in hand with the full value chain, the auto value chain, in order to deliver value. Okay, so SMEs have to work with large corporations, and many SMEs have gone on to be listed companies. Many have become listed companies, which is absolutely fine and which is the right thing to do. I think our policy of SMEs, it was small is beautiful at a point of time. The limits have changed. Today, right now, the biggest challenge I figure from everybody is that SMEs are not getting access to credit. Till that changes, it's unlikely that life will change. I think you have access to technology, you have access to people, either own or you can source people on a consulting basis. But if you do not have access to capital, that's a challenge. SMEs truly work when they have great ideas. And ideas are about solving some problem in that value chain or solving some problem for the big company or for the consumer. If all your ideas are in that direction, then I think you'll do.
Sure. Thank you very much again, sir. Thank you very much for joining. I will give it back to the organizer.